I've stood in a lot of corridors in my career: schools, banks, parking garages, hotel stairwells, places that go quiet in the wrong way and stay quiet until something breaks. The fourth-floor pediatric ward at Briarwood Children's Medical Center was a new one for me. Primary colored murals on the walls, a fish tank humming near the elevator, and a man named Gerald Cobb standing at the far end of the hallway with his back to the window and a hunting knife held loose at his side. He wasn't there to hurt anyone. I knew that inside the first 30 seconds. Cobb was a veteran, 41 years old, tours in the kind of places that don't let you come home clean. His son, 8 years old, 3 rooms down, recovering from an emergency appendectomy. Someone at the insurance desk had told Cobb he wasn't listed as an authorized visitor. He'd walked through the checkpoint and come upstairs anyway. By the time my team staged in the stairwell and I took the corridor, he'd been standing at that window for 11 minutes. Not moving, not threatening, just refusing to leave until he could see the boy. I had 6 officers positioned. Protocol says you contain, you communicate, you wait for resolution or deterioration. What I didn't know at that point, and what my radio hadn't told me yet, was that Cobb had been shot 2 days earlier. Not a through and through, not a graze, a low-velocity round, undertreated, sutured badly at a walk-in clinic, and left to go quietly wrong. He'd been running a fever for 36 hours. The way he was leaning against the window frame, I'd read it as exhaustion and grief. It was that and something worse. The attending on the floor was a pediatric hospitalist named Rice, early 50s, a man who moved through a ward like he owned every square foot of it. He'd stationed himself at the nurse's station with 2 of my plainclothes officers, and was busy telling anyone who'd listen that this was a police matter, and that the floor needed to be cleared of non-essential personnel. He said it twice, loudly, in the direction of the nurses. She was the one he said it to the second time. She'd been at the medication cart when Cobb walked in, a day-shift pediatric nurse whose badge read Callaway. I'd glanced at her when I first took the floor and filed her away as a non-factor. Quiet, maybe 30, dark scrubs, stethoscope looped over her badge lanyard, moving through the corridor the way people do when they've learned to take up no extra space. Rice looked at her and said flatly, "I need you to stay back and keep the other nurses behind the station." "This isn't your situation," she said. "Yes, doctor," and stayed where she was. For about 4 minutes, I was watching Cobb's hands. That's where it lives. Always the hands. When I heard footsteps moving down the corridor in the wrong direction, I turned. She was walking toward him. Not fast, not slow. The way you'd walk toward something you'd done before. I put my hand up and said, "Ma'am, stop." She didn't stop, she didn't look at me. She kept walking and said low and even, "He's going into shock. Look at his left side." I looked. Cobb's shirt. Dark fabric. I hadn't seen it until she named it. A stain that wasn't dry and wasn't small, spreading under his jacket at the hip. His breathing had changed in the last 2 minutes, and I'd tagged it as agitation. She'd tagged it as something else. I didn't stop her again. She came within 10 feet of him and stopped there on her own. She didn't reach for him. She stood with her hands at her sides, open, visible, and she said his name once. She'd seen the intake sheet, or she'd been listening. I didn't know yet. And then she said something else. Not loud. Something I didn't catch the first time. Cobb's head came up. He'd been staring at the floor with the fixed, inward look of a man fighting his own body. And when he heard what she said, his eyes came up to her face, and something in him stopped holding. Not collapsed, stopped holding. Like a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and finally sees someone who knows the weight. He said a word. One word, barely audible, more breath than voice. He said, "Shepard." I didn't know what it meant. My radio did. We had a Force Reconnaissance Liaison Officer in the building that afternoon, Captain Deering, down in the administrative wing for a credentialing review. Nothing to do with us. He had a scanner tuned to our tactical frequency out of professional habit. And when that word came through on my open radio, I heard his voice cut in 6 seconds later. "Say that again. What name did the subject use?" I keyed my radio. "Shepard." The nurse, she said something to him, and he called her Shepard. 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Which floor?" "I'm on my way up." I didn't understand any of it yet. What I understood was what was happening in the corridor in front of me. She had moved to within arm's length of Cobb. He had let the knife drop to his side, point down. not threatening, just still holding it the way a man holds something he's forgotten is in his hand. She was talking to him, voice too low for me to hear the words. I could read the cadence. It was the rhythm of someone who has done triage in bad places. Who knows how to land information without lighting panic? She was telling him what was wrong with him and what she was going to do about it, and he was listening. She got her hand to his left side. He let her. I need gauze and a fresh dressing from the cart, she said, not raising her voice, not looking away from him. One of my officers relayed it to the nurse's station. A younger nurse came forward at a half-run and set the supplies on the floor 3 feet behind her and backed away. She crouched, reached back, came up with the gauze, and started working with one hand while the other stayed on his arm. Reese had appeared at the edge of the corridor. He watched for a moment and said, "She needs to wait for the paramedics." "She's got him," I said. "Shh." And I said it the way you say something that doesn't have a question in it. And he went quiet. Cobb was down on one knee by the time she had the pressure dressing in place. Not falling, lowering himself, guided. She went down with him, one hand on his back, talking without stopping. The knife was on the floor behind him. He hadn't put it there deliberately. He'd simply stopped caring about it, which is a different thing and a better thing. "He needs a surgeon," she said, still not raising her voice. "The wound has been closed over an infection. He needs a surgical consult in the next 30 minutes, not the ER, a surgeon, directly." By then, the elevator had opened at the end of the corridor. Captain Deering came through the door in his service uniform. Not dress blues, greens, and he walked fast. He was a compact man, close-cropped, the kind of officer who fills a hallway just by moving through it. He saw her on the floor with Cobb, and he stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. She hadn't turned around yet. Then he looked at me and said, "How long has she been on this floor?" I said I didn't know. I'd only been in the building 3 hours. "Marines don't forget their corpsmen," he said, not to me specifically, to the corridor. He said it the way you state a fact about gravity. She heard it. She handed off pressure to one of my officers. She'd been directing him for the last 60 seconds without ceremony, and he'd been following her without question. And she stood up. She turned around. Deering came to attention. It happened cleanly. No announcement and no theater. Heels together, hands flat at his seams, chin level, and he held it. Then he said her name, her real name, not the call sign, and then he said the rest. "Corpsman 2nd Class, Force Reconnaissance, 2 deployments, Helmand and Ramadi, 14 hours solo aid station during a comms blackout at a firebase I'd never heard of. 8 Marines carried out alive, when the numbers said most of them were done. I had 5 officers in that corridor. I don't know which one of them moved first. By the time I noticed, 3 of them were at attention. The 4th came up a half-second later. The 5th was the young officer who'd been maintaining pressure on Cobb's wound, and he looked up from the floor with both hands, still on the dressing, and something in his face that I understood, because it was in mine too. She stood in her dark scrubs, with her badge hanging crooked from the lanyard, and she did not look away from Deering, and she did not say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "He needs that surgeon." That was the whole speech. That was all of it. Reyes was behind me. I don't know when he'd moved up. I heard him say something low, not to anyone in particular. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the register. The register of a man recalculating something he thought he'd already figured out. The paramedics came up 8 minutes later. By then, Cobb was stable enough to be angry about the IV she'd started in his arm, which is what you want. Anger means blood pressure. Blood pressure means time. He looked up at her once while they were loading him onto the gurney, and he said something, and she nodded once. And that was the last I saw of that exchange. I stayed on the floor for another 40 minutes for the paperwork and the debrief. At some point during that window, I walked past the nurse's station. She was back at the medication cart. Same dark scrubs, same stethoscope, same unhurried pace through the corridor. Donna Varick, the charge nurse, was standing near the station watching her move. And the look on Varick's face was the look of someone seeing a room they thought they knew from a completely different angle. I've thought about that afternoon more than once, since then. About Cobb saying that one word and what it carried. The weight of a bad night in a bad place, and a woman who held the line when holding the line, was all there was to do. About Deering coming to attention in a pediatric corridor with cartoon fish on the walls, and the officers behind him who didn't need to be told. About her going back to the medication or cart. That's the part that stays with me. The salute, the record, the call sign. Those are the things you tell people. But the part I carry is the way she turned back to work. Like the corridor was already behind her. Like the only thing in front of her was the next patient on the floor, who needed what she had to give. I've stood in a lot of corridors, that one I won't forget.